an ongoing legacy. And I wanted to use the platform that I have to say we can't look away. We can't look away from these kids. We can't look away from this trauma. We have a responsibility to fight for justice, knowing that Canada enacted this genocide against Indigenous people. And that's why I wanted to bring national attention to this. We can't turn away from this. We can't ignore this. And we have to demand justice.
Liberal leader Justin Trudeau was recently in Cowessess First Nation as well, making a child welfare announcement with the chief here. And the Liberal government also recently announced more than $300 million for burial site searches at former residential school sites. How would an NDP government do anything differently? You say you want to get things done. How exactly do you speed up progress on reconciliation? What exactly do you have to offer that's any different from the Liberals?
One thing we've got to acknowledge is that that legacy of injustice is ongoing. It didn't stop with the residential institutions. To this day, right now, the Canadian government was found to have recklessly and willfully discriminated against Indigenous children in the Indigenous child welfare system. That is a very harsh finding by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, that they were willfully and recklessly discriminated against. Despite that finding, Justin Trudeau is fighting these kids in court. He is fighting them in court. There is no way that on one hand, Justin Trudeau can claim to walk the path of reconciliation if he is fighting Indigenous kids in court. A New Democrat government, me as Prime Minister, I would immediately stop that fight against Indigenous kids. I would immediately implement the ruling of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. We would ensure that every community in this country had clean drinking water. We would respect Indigenous communities as nations and work with them with the spirit of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, with true nation-to-nation relationships. We would walk the path of reconciliation. There is no excuse that in the 21st century, with a G7 nation, that Indigenous communities still don't have clean drinking water. There is no excuse that I buy that makes any sense whatsoever. That's what we would do differently. We would walk the path with real conviction and real justice in our hearts.
Mr. Singh, Michael Couture from Global National. With all due respect, these are some of the same things that Justin Trudeau said in 2015 when he was fighting against Stephen Harper. So why should communities believe you if, as you say, Justin Trudeau let them down? How are you not going to let them down, besides saying political will? Because everybody will say, hey, I'm going to get it done. But once they get into power, they realize it's tough to govern.
One, I'm not Justin Trudeau. I'm not like him. I've lived a different life. And I've felt some of the pain of what it's like to be considered less than. I understand the pain of being someone that's not valued, not worth anything. And Indigenous people have been made to feel that way for so long. Maybe other politicians don't care. Maybe it's not important to them. Maybe they've never experienced what it's like to be considered less worthy just because of the way you look. I know a little bit what that's like. And I promise you, I'll be different.
As a follow-up, just want to ask you about sick leave. Why are you calling it cynical politics by the Liberals if they finally did something that you've been calling for when you were very happy to take a victory lap on everything else that you got done for Canadians that the Liberals weren't doing originally?
In this case, we went through a first wave, a second wave, a third wave of COVID-19, and every step of the way we said we need better paid sick leave. We need paid sick leave to save lives. Public health officials said one of the most important tools to save lives is paid sick leave. We heard it repeated again and again from all levels of public health experts saying one of the most important things we can do to stop the spread of COVID-19 and to save lives is make sure we've got adequate paid sick leave to keep people home when they're sick. We said that again and again. And Justin Trudeau said, oh, it's not my job, it's not my jurisdiction, I can't do it. He said no again and again. To announce something in the midst of an election that could have been done 18 months ago is disgusting, particularly when lives were lost because he didn't do it earlier. And particularly because we said clearly we would have supported this 18 months ago. We said we would have passed this. We wanted it. And it's not about claiming victory, it's about saving lives. And lives could have been saved if Justin Trudeau would have just done this 18 months ago. What changed in those 18 months? The public health experts have still cried out saying that we need paid sick leave. They've still demanded that for these 18 months. Why is he listening now? And why is he making this announcement in the midst of an election? What made him announce it now and not do it 18 months ago? That to me is cynical politics, to announce it in an election when he could have done it 18 months ago, particularly when we're in one of the worst crises that we've been up against, and particularly when so many public health experts have said that is the single most important tool to fight this pandemic and to save lives, when we knew that worker transmission was one of the highest causes of transmission.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Je
Bonjour.
voudrais vous entendre en français sur ce que vous feriez de plus ou de différent par rapport à Justin Trudeau. Les libéraux ont quand même investi des centaines de millions de dollars pour les nations autochtones du pays. Alors, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire là-dessus?
Ce qu'on a vu dans ces derniers 18 mois, c'est si le gouvernement veut faire quelque chose, il le fait. Et un exemple clair que je peux donner, dans les premières semaines de cette pandémie, les grandes banques ont demandé d'appui et les libéraux ont sauté pour les aider avec 750 milliards de dollars. Milliards de dollars dans les premières semaines de cette pandémie. Justin Trudeau a montré si quelque chose est une priorité, il répond tout de suite. Mais pour la communauté autochtone qui demande de l'eau potable, quelque chose qui est tellement simple comme un enjeu de droit de la personne, tout le monde dans les grandes villes à travers le pays ils ont accès à l'eau potable. Le fait que dans le 28e siècle, dans cette époque, avec un pays qui est un des plus riches à travers le monde, que Justin Trudeau, après 6 ans, a brisé sa promesse de livrer l'eau potable à chaque communauté autochtone, montre que ce n'est pas une priorité pour lui. Et la différence que les néo-démocrates vont faire, c'est pour nous, c'est une priorité et on va livrer la marchandise.
Et sur un autre sujet, les Américains ont annoncé qu'on laissait les frontières fermées avec le Canada pour 1 mois de plus. La situation ne va pas bien du tout aux États-Unis. Pourtant, les Américains peuvent entrer au Canada. Est-ce que vous pensez que le Canada devrait à nouveau fermer ses frontières aux Américains?
C'est une question difficile. J'ai grandi à Windsor et Windsor, c'est une ville tellement liée avec les États-Unis. Plusieurs personnes travaillent et c'est la même chose pour plusieurs villes qui sont vraiment vraiment près des États-Unis. Plusieurs personnes habitent à un côté, travaillent à l'autre côté. On a des familles partagées dans les 2 pays. Donc, c'est tellement difficile, je comprends ça. Mais avec chaque question de si on doit ouvrir les frontières et si les États-Unis le font ou non, pour moi, on doit suivre les conseils des santé publiques et de s'assurer qu'on prend des décisions qui protègent la population. I grew up in a town in Windsor, where a lot of people lived and worked spread over between the two countries. Lots of people lived in Windsor and worked in Detroit, or lived in Detroit and had family in Windsor. There's lots of connections. So I know this has been an incredibly difficult time for so many families that have a similar reality, that share border with the States. And I know it's been difficult. I know it's been really hard. With any decision around whether we open or close the borders, I again want to make sure that we are relying on the best evidence from public health and following the best course of action that protects Canadians. I just really want to highlight how tough it's been, particularly for those communities that are so interconnected, like Windsor, where I grew up, and many other communities.
Hi there, Alex Malone with the Regina Leader Post. You mentioned when it comes to the unmarked graves, when it comes to finding justice for it, part of your platform talks about getting records from church groups, oblates, etc. Can you kind of specifically say what justice looks like when it comes to addressing and finding those responsible for the unmarked graves and for the deaths at residential schools? Thank
you. You know, one really important point that I wanted to add is that New Democrats, and I look at this as a crime. This was a crime. This was a crime committed against Indigenous people. This was a crime of genocide, the worst crime possible. And what we need to do is prosecute it like a crime. And that means appointing special prosecutors. Mumala Kakak and Charlie Angus have been leading the charge on behalf of New Democrats on this. But this is a crime that was committed against Indigenous people that should be prosecuted like a crime. That's one thing we would do. We would appoint a special prosecutor and make sure it's prosecuted. In addition, we need to make sure that all the calls to action are implemented. We want to make sure that all documents are released. Indigenous people, to this day, many of them do not know what happened to their loved ones. Imagine not only losing your child, your little baby, but then not knowing whatever happened to them, not knowing what became of them, not knowing, did they run away, did they make it, and still hope in your heart that maybe they're living a life somewhere else, or did they die? Not knowing that is a horrible pain that Indigenous people continue to live with. And if there's any document out there that could give some closure, it has to be released. There's no excuse for it not being released.
I guess the one fault that I have, you're about to be a parent. What was it like going through the unmarked graves?
I met. I don't want it to be about me. That's the important thing. So of course it hit differently. It hit differently being a parent, for sure. But again, it's not about me. It's about Indigenous communities. And it's about what we've got to do for them. And it's about what this means that a country killed its own people. So it's not about me being a parent. It's about Indigenous people being denied justice, being denied dignity.
Mr. Singh, Bill Graveland from Canadian Press. It's sort of a personal question, but it appeared you were offering a prayer when you were out. Can you talk about that a little bit?
In the Sikh tradition, I wear kirpan. A kirpan is a symbol of fighting for justice, my commitment to fight for justice. And when we were together, we were meditating on the fact that we are all one, we're all connected, and that injustice against any one of us is injustice against all of us. And our meditation is that we are all one, we are all connected. And so seeing this injustice against Indigenous people, we should feel it in our hearts as an injustice against all of us.
And just to follow on a different matter, do you believe that the leaders have been setting a poor example for social distancing during the pandemic?
I think it is a tough thing to do, and I'm not gonna, cast stones on anyone. I think people are trying their best. I will definitely say Justin Trudeau should not have called the election in the first place, but certainly it's something that we're gonna do our best. I encourage everyone to do their best. What we're doing, I can just let folks know, and we're always open to improving, but we are wearing masks, and we are contact tracing. We are trying to ensure that we're not putting anyone at risk, and we're doing our best. This is a difficult thing, and no one's really dealt with a pandemic in their lifetime. This is our first one, and we are dealing with it as best we can. So I don't want to, I'm not going to point fingers at other parties on this. I think everyone should just do their best. And we can't go back in the past. I would have told Justin Trudeau again and again, like I did before, not to call it, but we're in it, and we're going to do our best. And I encourage everyone to follow the best protocols and safety they can.
Mickey Judich here with CBC, the local division based in Regina. For local media here, we're used to politicians coming here sort of for a photo op. So what meaningful thing did you take away from this experience? And did you learn anything from Chief Cadmus or the community here?
Well, one of the things that I think it's hard to imagine unless you live it is that intergenerational trauma, is really to understand how that trauma doesn't stop with one survivor. It doesn't stop with a person who personally went through it. That trauma that a mom or a dad passes on to their kids inadvertently because they've suffered it, and that trauma that goes on from a child of a survivor to their children, so the grandchildren are also living that trauma. That's something I think is really important, and when I hear the stories and spoke with Chief DeLorme, we spent some time in private without media, just understanding that impact, understanding that it's ongoing, that legacy, and how that legacy directly impacts, one of the elders mentioned the impact on housing for Indigenous members that don't live on reserve, that also live in urban communities, and how that is all interconnected. And so it's why we've been saying that when we talk about housing or we talk about tackling poverty, we also need to have a housing plan that's for Indigenous communities, by Indigenous communities, in urban settings, not just in residential or not just in reserved communities. So that's something that really was highlighted. I take away from this moment just another commitment to continue to fight for justice. For me, this is why I wanted to be here. I wanted to remind Canada, remind us all that we can't look away from this and that we have to continue to fight for justice.
And then I don't know if you're willing to speak on this, but did you exchange gifts with Chief Cadmus, and are you willing to disclose what you gifted?
I wasn't going to announce it, but I appreciate the question. I can share that I mentioned I wear a kirpan. The first kirpan that I got, a kirpan I should mention is one of the Sikh articles of faith, and it's a commitment we wear. It stands for grace and honor, and it means our commitment to fight for justice. So I wear this every day, and it reminds me that is my oath, my commitment to fight for justice. And the kirpan that I got when I started my leadership, the kirpan that I got when I won as Member of Parliament, the kirpan that I had with me throughout kind of most of my journey as a leader in federal politics is the kirpan that I gifted to Chief DeLorme, just to remind myself that I'm committed to justice. We're not supposed to be attached. Of course, I have little sentimental attachments. It's been with me for so long. But I wanted to just let Chief DeLorme know that for me, this is a serious commitment. I will fight for justice.
Cole Davenport with CTV News Regina. I guess the question I had for you is just of all the sites where unmarked graves have been discovered, where residential schools either once stood or do stand today, why this one here on Cowessess?
The first site at Kamloops gained a lot of attention, and it was something that really sparked something across the country. And it sparked, I would say, almost a movement where people came out, and there were memorials that sprung up in communities across Canada. Something I was really proud to see. It was really beautiful to see people cared so much. And then people said, what more can we do? Can we do something more than mourning? And people were saying, well, we should be pushing for some justice. We should be pushing for some action. And I thought that was beautiful as well when people were saying we should do something about this. We need action. And then it seemed to, more grave sites, unmarked graves were found, mass graves were found, and then it seemed to lose attention. And because here in Cowessess Nation, there was such a significant number, again, 751, it didn't receive the same attention, I felt. And I feel like there's an opportunity for us to look straight in the eyes of this injustice, to not turn our eyes aside, to not ignore this, and to not forget this. And so I really wanted to just draw attention that this is something we've got to deal with as a country. I love Canada. I think Canada has amazing things to offer. My family fled a really difficult time in India to be here. And I think there's something so beautiful about Canada. But there's also some really horrible and painful things about Canada. And what it means to Indigenous people is something pretty horrific. It is a place that was bent on eradicating a people. That is a part of our legacy. We've got to confront that as well. And so I want to draw attention to that because I think we can become better. We can become a better people, a better country when we deal with this.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh. Merci beaucoup.
Bonjour.
J'aimerais vous entendre en français. Fred Harding de Regina pour la Société Radio-Canada. Vous savez, à une époque où même le Canada connaît des divisions de plus en plus profondes entre les segments de sa population, on vient parler d'ici d'un enjeu qui touche une communauté en particulier, mais en quoi cet enjeu-là peut traverser peut-être les frontières des groupes et peut s'inscrire dans un objectif qui touche tous les Canadiens et influencer un vote national autour de ces enjeux-là, si on veut.
J'apprécie beaucoup la question parce que c'est quelque chose que je pense. Je pense souvent comment est-ce qu'on peut rassembler les gens. Pour moi, c'est toujours mon but. Mon but, c'est comment est-ce qu'on peut de rassembler les gens qui vivent dans les endroits différents, dans les régions différentes, dans les villes différentes et qui ont des vies un peu différentes aussi. Comment on peut les rassembler? Et ce que je trouve rassembleur comme valeur, c'est l'idée de la justice. Et pour moi, ce qui se passe ici, et pourquoi on est ici, on parle de la justice pour la communauté autochtone, c'est basé sur cette idée qu'on est tous connectés. Et s'il y a une injustice qui touche une communauté, ça frappe nous tous. Mais si on peut aider les gens autour de nous, on peut améliorer la société, on peut améliorer la vie de tout le monde. Donc, pour moi, ce qui est rassembleur, c'est pour investir dans l'avenir, pour régler beaucoup des problèmes qui se présentent pour nous dans notre pays, dans notre vie. C'est le fait qu'on doit investir dans les gens. Et à ce moment, plusieurs personnes ont fait face des défis, continuent de faire face des défis, mais les autres riches, ils ont effectivement, ils ont eu une opportunité d'augmenter leur profit, d'avoir plus d'argent, d'avoir plus de richesses. Et pour moi, ce qu'on doit faire, c'est de s'assurer que les autres riches payent le juste part. C'est la justice de faire ça. Et puis investir dans les gens pour les soins de santé, pour le logement, pour les services. Et je pense que cette idée, ce concept de justice est un concept rassembleur.
Merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie.
Thank you. This concludes our press conference. Merci. C'est conclu la conférence de presse.
Merci. Thank you very much.